Hello everyone, we are the group 10 and we are going to discuss chapter 11 Towards a Sustainable World, Sustainable Development. So, the intended learning outcomes within the orientation, the students are expected to differentiate stability from sustainability, then articulate models of global sustainable development. So, how can we differentiate stability from sustainability? So, ang stability kay nag-define ni siya sa pagkalig-on o pagkamaayo sa kabutang. Example, ang economy na ana siya ay kalig-on kung balance o fair sa kada sektor. Nya ang sustainability mo ni siyang saktong paggamit sa atong environment para pod matugunan ang atong mga needs or bisag atong mga wants o kagustuhan. Sustainable economic systems. The first decade of the 21st century witnessed the strong impression that the global economy had become a sphere of extreme uncertainty and risk. Symptoms were numerous. Apart from the collapsing financial markets, there were rising unemployment, deeper inequalities, a shrinking middle class, extreme indebtedness, and inability of governments to force through reforms. In addition, there were the increasing challenges of climate change and availability of resources, which are necessary to develop new technologies and keep economies growing. So the author asserts that the main reason of the current problems has been the inability of modern societies to produce enough stability and sustainability. So these two elements have been produced so far in a rather fragmented way and not always efficiently. Stability, firmness in position, permanence and resistance to change, especially in a disruptive way. The International Monetary Fund or IMF describes it as avoiding large swings in economic activity, high inflation, and excessive volatility in exchange rates and financial markets. This definition refers to indexes, which describes the economy in short-term categories. Headline news saying that the economy is stable means actually that the system is in one of the calm phases of the business cycle, neither heading towards boom nor towards depression. Classical economists of this epoch believe in the self-regulation ability of economic systems and, in their view, an unrestricted price mechanism should be enough to restore stability, at least in the long term. The global interconnectedness, which was very advantageous to the world economy because of exchange, showed its other, less appealing face. Another problem was the new technologies made economic process faster and less predictable. Since 2007, many countries had been trying to restore stabilization with expensive spending programs and generous monetary policy. Sustainability. It considers the long-term capacities of a system to exist, not its short-term resistance to change. It is about responsible use of resources. A well-known definition of sustainability which emphasized its economic notion comes from the Brundtland Report, World Commission on Environment and Development, 1987, prepared for the United Nations in 1987. It says that development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs deserves the label of sustainability. The pioneer was the British scholar Thomas Malthus, who published in the 1798 a book on the grim consequences of a rising population, which consumes all surplus food production and thus prevents a rise in living standards. The solution was found in the increased productivity of agriculture, which culminated more than 2 centuries later in the Green Revolution in places such as India and Bangladesh. Garrett Hardin. In 1968, he wrote his famous work Tragedy of the Commons, in which he analyzed how public goods got exhausted by actors in a free market economy. His arguments help to explain why, for example, non-regulated access to fishery can quickly lead to empty seas and collapse of the fishery industry in many countries. A few years later, in 1972, the Club of Rome published The Limits to Growth, a groundbreaking study which dealt precisely with the connection between economic growth and scarcity of resources. Raising awareness of the sustainability problem in environmental issues and resources translated into international cooperation. So far, there have been many conferences on climate change and framework agreements. Example is the Kyoto Protocol on reduction of greenhouse gases, but their effectiveness is not very high. Many countries see such global actions against climate change as endangering their vital economic interests, among them particularly developing economies. According to the study published by the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, since 1990 to 2011, the most populous countries in the world and rising industrial powers, China and India, increased their emissions of CO2 at 227% and 100% respectively, towards a sustainable and more stable economic model. So it is time to elaborate on what kind of economic governance can deal efficiently with problems of stability and sustainability. So, three areas of economic models that should be rethought and redesigned. First, the issue of what is an efficient market needs some new clarification. Second, we must accept the fact that there might be many different institutional ways to efficient economic systems, but it does not necessarily mean that some of them are a priori more efficient, stable, and better for sustainability than the others. And third, a redesign needs a wider look at what is economic growth and what kind of growth is compatible with the idea of sustainability. Complexity approach to markets. Markets are the most substantial constructional element of economies. However, nowadays we are dealing with biases which make understanding their functioning puzzling. As a consequence, there are difficulties with efficient economic policy and obviously with providing stability and sustainability. So, what is the role of markets in an economy? Markets are the places where buyers and sellers can meet to sell and purchase goods and services. Markets provide places for firms to sell their goods and gain revenue. Markets provide places for consumers to buy the goods and services that they need. Markets are most self-regulated, relying on the principles of supply and demand to determine prices. One of them is surely the formal concept of markets which dominates modern economics. It is based on strong assumptions which make building theoretical models easier, but like many authors have included even before the crisis stated, only partly coincide with reality. Another strong assumption is that markets tend always to a state of equilibrium set out of forces of demand and supply. If there is a situation of imbalance caused by external shocks, these forces push markets automatically towards an efficient equilibrium level of price, no matter what kind of shock caused them. Next, the pluralism of development model. How convergence failed. The years after 1980 put into the economic debate the issue of convergence of national economic models. The source of this consideration was the rapid expansion of neoliberal ideology, which saw markets as the most efficient way to social coordination and through growth creating machine. The neoliberal agenda brought, however, some problems. Firstly, it increased exposure of the world economic systems on crisis and contagion effects since most reforms were aiming at national deregulation, which was not replaced by efficient global regulation. Second problem concerned efficiency. The tacit and widespread assumption on superiority of free market solution has some flaws. There were issues with short-termism, high volatility, and inability to deal with externalities, which are directly connected with the challenge of sustainability. The efficiency assumption is also criticized in the context of social inequalities. And the third problem is the legitimacy of market based solutions. The market itself is not able to provide legitimacy, but it needs acceptance of all actors. Varieties of capitalism. This VOC is posited on a couple of basic assumptions. Firstly, it considers firms as the most important actors of welfare creation in national economies since they provide innovations and new products. To achieve their goals, they need access to resources, to mention the most fundamental ones: capital, labor, and skills. From the variety of systems, we can distinguish two outermost theoretical models: the liberal market economy and coordinated market economy. The liberal market economy can be characterized by dynamic access to resources, which means that it is relatively expensive to change conditions of transactions or resign from it. We can see this feature in design of markets for capital, labor, and skills. Capital in LME is derived from often from stock markets where assets can quickly change owners and their value is estimated by price mechanism. The labor market is also shaped by dynamic relations, where hire and fire is relatively easy thanks to limited regulations. If firms perceive the market situation bad, they simply lay off workers. But if prospects from promising, they quickly employ. So the prime example of a liberal market economy is the USA. But the label is also applied to the form of capitalist economy found in Australia, Britain, Canada, Ireland, and New Zealand. So liberal market economy is a free market economy, which means wala ni siya intervention or regulation sa any government. In a purely free market, buyers and sellers arrive at prices based only on supply and demand. Now, what is coordinated market economy? Transactions are more stable and long-term oriented. Capital is provided by banks, which create loyalty-based relations with firms. Thus, the access is patient. The labor market is characterized by long-term contracts and relatively low differences in wage levels. Skills are produced rather in companies which invest their own capital in order to create a set of specific rare qualification fitting ideally into their product profile. So, ang coordinated market economist di ay kay ma-rely ni og formal institutions para makaregulate sa market, and then we need to coordinate the interaction of firms and firm relations with suppliers, customers, employees, and financiers. Next, approaches of growth. The rollover effect. Modern capitalism developed in the last 200 years based itself on the assumption of growth and expansion. The more products we are able to deliver, the better for everybody. Expression of this attitude is the domination of the GDP index in measurements of performance of national economies. It shows the output in a given year and expresses it in monetary value, the national currency. It has many advantages. So first of all, the GDP offers statistical precision and comparative perspective since it is relatively easy to apply similar techniques of collecting and converting data in countries across the world. In this way, GDP creates also a kind of competitive environment for nations. It is evident who has the highest GDP growth or the highest GDP per capita. However, the GDP is not flawless. It's being willingly clear numbers can show only one dimensions of growth, hiding others. For example, a dinner prepared at home by family members and friends is worse for the economy than dinner ordered in the restaurant. If there is no transaction, there is simply no growth measured. On the other hand, a heavy smoker of cigarettes is a true GDP driver. Not only can the single transaction of buying cigarettes be supportive, but also later visits to physicians and purchase of medicaments. In a similar way, one can look at divorces, which can make real estate markets grow, give a boost to furniture factories, not to mention the demand for lawyers. More growth. There is a strong voice in favor of continuation of the existing dominating path. Economies should still take care about their output level, so the GDP remains the most important point of reference. Another assumption is a strong belief in technological progress. It will increase productivity and, in particular, save resources. Hybrid or electric cars, bioagriculture, recycling techniques, communication that reduces traveling, etc. All should contribute to faster and simultaneously better quality of growth. The logic of growth remains the same. The more goods, the better. The amended growth. It sees the GDP index as an important measure of human achievements, but it is to be combined with additional indexes which refer to several aspects of quality of life and sustainability. The only problem is that it is still not very clear what aspects are important. This is why there are many more or less complicated indexes in the market, which compete against each other. The only globally accepted measure of amended growth and its quality is the Human Development Index, or the HDI. It was created in the 1990 by Mahbubul Haq, the Pakistani economist, and then developed by the Indian Nobel Prize laureate Amartya Sen and used by the United Nations Developing Programme for Comparative Studies. End of growth. Tyler Cowen, the professor at George Mason University in Virginia, prophesies that the world economy is moving towards a time of a great stagnation. Cowen says that there are no low-hanging fruits anymore. He means by this that the day of inexpensive access to resources is over. The most important argument is, however, a slower pace of innovation, a crucial point of explaining lower rates of productivity rise. It is worth stressing that until the 18th century, the average of world economy was very low because real innovations were simply lacking. The issue of sustainability will expand to all fields of economics lives and merge with stability. Short-term policies will be evaluated under the long-term impact. Secondly, we are moving towards a new economic model. The third element will be the pluralism of institutionally arrangements which can create unique competitive profiles of national economies and more stable global systems. The fourth and the last element is a correct global and measure of development. The very focus on growth of production is not sustainable, although still informing well about a state of economy. In general, sustainability focuses on equal economic growth that generates wealth for all without harming the environment. Investment and unequal distribution of the economic resources will strengthen the other pillars of sustainability for a complete development.